It's the absolute blatant hypocrisy of these types. Don't bring that to the table and then expect that we're all going to just sit there, smile at you, and just be like, oh, sweetie, it's so nice of you. Oh, you said that you wish that, all the kids that were like me growing up were all exterminated, and then your God could throw us in a lake of fire. That's totally fine. No! F you. Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today, I would like to discuss the topic of civility politics. Now, you might be wondering, Zoe, is that really that big of a deal? And yeah, it kind of is. And the reason why is because if you're curious what exactly I mean by civility politics, it's essentially where somebody engages in tone policing, where they tell you that certain types of arguments or discussions aren't proper, that these topics shouldn't even be something that's being discussed, and it is offensive by your volume, the words that you use, the way that you present it, etc. That is the real issue, and it shifts the focus of the discussion on anything substantive politically to essentially saying that you are being kind of rude, and that's the real problem. And it's as if this concept of rudeness somehow supersedes anything else in the conversation, even if this other person has advocated such things as genocide or ethnostates. As long as they are polite and smiling and nice when they advocate for those positions, they expect you to act the same way to them. And others on Twitter or that watch debates or whatever else, they might say something like the person that is, advocating for social justice might have gotten angry or might have gotten very passionate and pushing back against these like bigoted ideas. And the real issue is them losing their cool or them getting mad. Now, from an optic standpoint, I can kind of understand where this comes in, as far as we obviously don't want to look like you're just that we're yelling and ranting at people for no reason at all, like as if there's not a legitimate reason to be upset at these people. However, I want to focus specifically on some things that have bothered me for months going on, I mean years at this point. And it's just in the fact that when you engage in civility politics and you say like the real metric of whether somebody's being offensive or they're in the wrong in a discussion is their tone, how forceful they are, how passionate they are. What you're doing is you can inadvertently create a space that is safe for bigots to come and essentially attack LGBT people, attack people of color, denigrate women, and act and say with the most and say some of the most awful things that you could to another person and insult every portion of their identity, including their religion, their whatever their demographic status is. Meanwhile, you're telling the people that are being aggressed upon that the worst thing that they can do is respond to these people with any type of passion, as if they should sit there, listen to all of these insults being thrown at them, then stoically, civilly continue to have a discussion with them long after any boundaries have been crossed of any type of normal civil discussion. So in areas like Discord or any type of social media, obviously you can see the type of environment that would be cultivated if only a few, such as like neo-Nazis, white nationalists types, if they are allowed to come in and start spewing rhetoric all across a Discord server, they face no moderation penalty. You will see the progressive types end up just being run off flatly of these platforms, because no one is going to remain in a space where they are being continuously treated as less than human. And all you're doing is creating an environment where the abuser is empowered and their victim ends up being punished by the system that you are maintaining in order to create civil discussion, even though the discussion has been anything but. And make no mistake about it, there's nothing polite in advocating against the humanity of other people. Some quick examples of this would be white nationalist Richard Spencer and everyone's favorite TERF, J.K. Rowling. Both of these people have supported and propagated bigoted positions Obviously, Spencer has done it to like much more extreme of an example. And J.K. Rowling has continued to spread hatred of trans people. And some might say that it's ridiculous to petition for J.K. not to be part of that stupid Harry Potter reunion, which she was able to be part of anyway. And they'll gesture at this like greater narrative of cancel culture and try and warn us against that. However, we must always keep in mind of such things as the tolerance paradox. The tolerance paradox, if you're not familiar with it, basically points out astutely that in a system where you allow people to be bigots as much as they want to, you will end up creating a system that promotes bigotry by tolerating intolerance. That's the tolerance paradox. We cannot tolerate intolerant people within our spaces if we want those spaces to maintain a space where we can all have civil discussion. If the goal actually is to be able to discuss civilly these various topics, then we cannot tolerate intolerant people being part of those spaces. And if you disagree with me and you think, Zoe, that's outrageous, we should always tolerate intolerance. Okay, up to what point? Because it seems like even the most staunch free speech advocate will step back a little bit on these principles if their demographic becomes targeted by violence of somebody else advocating to do harm to them. All of a sudden, they want to step back from that free speech a little bit. You saw this with like the C word discourse and that sort of thing, where it's all fun and games to laugh about slurs and stuff. But the moment that you find some word or slur that gets under that person's skin, all of a sudden they want some type of moderation done, or they feel like people should be suspended for using this other word as punishment, as if they were a minority themselves. All right, so a little bit ago on Twitter, there's another Twitter atheist, basically godless engineer, GE, and he tweeted out like trans women are trans liberation now, trans rights are human rights, something like that. This guy named Alan showed up and complained to GE about posting a pro-trans message, saying that he shouldn't be posting stuff like that to his account when his account should only have to do with skepticism or atheism. Now, some trans folks, including myself, responded to this guy and was like, why, what's the issue with saying trans rights are human rights? What's your issue with trans people? He then went on to try to argue with like dozens of people that he is not a transphobe and he has no problem with trans people, but he doesn't feel like people like a godless engineer should be tweeting stuff like support for the trans community, especially because this is right after J.K. Rowling had tweeted some other transphobic stuff. And GE was basically showing some support. Now, our allies tweeting support for us, sometimes it is nice to get on Twitter or social media and seeing somebody who is a cis ally tweeting something that about caring about trans people. It was weird to me that Alan basically got offended, then started accusing all of us of bullying him when he entered that thread specifically to say that no one should be saying trans rights are human rights unless they are directly involved in a conversation about trans people. So he was the aggressor saying, no, you shouldn't go around saying a pro-trans message unless we're talking about trans people. But then when trans people showed up to say, hey, thank you, GE, for showing solidarity with us, this guy had a problem with it. And then he doubled down on it and tried to specifically like call me out, saying that I was bullying him for asking him what was his issue with trans people, for him to say that nobody should be going around saying that trans women are women, etc. And his biggest issue was that trans people that were addressing him weren't nice enough to him in trying to convince him that our rights do matter. That's how he spun it. He spun it from him complaining to GE to him being upset that trans people weren't polite enough in responding to him to tell him that, hey, it's okay to advocate for trans rights. And then one evening when I was on Discord, this guy entered the chat, was listening to us talk about neurodivergency and talk about trans issues. And he immediately starts kind of trolling us about neurodivergent people or trans people, which immediately turns to outright bigotry, including him advocating for trans people and neurodivergent people to essentially be culled as children to clean up the degeneracy out of society. Now, at this point, one of us had already tagged a mod. The mod got in there, but as soon as the mod gets in there, he starts trying to play nice and immediately switches his tone in the conversation to a more acceptable topic because he was essentially just trying to ban evade in the server. So he was allowed to sit in there with us after advocating for our deaths and continue to play coy and dance this line of saying, oh, well, I don't have I don't think anything awful should happen to y'all. I just don't think you belong in society. And he kept saying and gesturing at stuff like this. Once again, getting upset when we basically, some of us got more passionate with him, saying like he shouldn't be saying those things, or why is he even in the server? Like he's just here to troll people. It's very obvious, like he should kick rocks sort of thing. Then he basically was feigning this, oh, the real problem is y'all being upset at me. The tone that you have. Listen to how passionate you are. You're so mad. That's the real problem. And if we were only more civil to him, then maybe he would be willing to listen to trans issues, even though he already said that he literally wished that we would all be mass murdered. Another conversation that I had later on, also in a Discord server, we were talking specifically about trans issues. A random person joined the server. And then they went on to ask about how explicitly, because they were listening to us talk about the Equality Act and how that would improve the lives of trans people. She went on to ask how exactly, in what way would the Equality Act, if it were passed, help us in our lives? One of the other trans people there that answered first was a very young trans man, and he couldn't list precisely in what way his life would be impacted by it, but he knew that there were some portions of it that obviously benefit all trans people, which would include him. The other trans person that issued it, that answered the question, she was a bit more knowledgeable about it in some specific portions, but she also had a lot of blind spots in there. So she was like, she could list like maybe one or two. So then the person asking the questions immediately starts to say like, oh, well, it doesn't seem like those rights are all that important if it's not going to improve your lives substantially or in any significant way. Well, I was able to provide answers of how my life would be positively impacted right away, why we need those protections in the first place, and how other trans people who are not us could also benefit from having these laws passed. And I was like, if you really want to know in what ways this would help other trans people, like why do we need it? I was like, here's a link to the Equality Act, because I've talked about this before. And you can read all the things in it, like housing, voting, right to work, all this other stuff, like workplace protections for trans people, bathroom access, being able to play sports, having healthcare access, housing access. There's all sorts of stuff that would protect your rights as a trans person. Then she said, oh, well, she's already aware of all those various things. Like she could go and read that whenever she wants to. She wanted to know specifically in our lives, like how would that protect us? Just like she wanted to know, had we ever faced any direct bigotry of somebody saying, oh, I'm doing some bad thing to you because you're trans. Then I told her, I was like, before I answer that question, I was like, I want you to answer this question, because she basically was citing her experience as an immigrant and a woman of color as like, some experiences that she had had. And I said, okay, can you specifically give me instances where you suffered some type of discrimination, or where the protections under the Non-Discrimination Act specifically helped you in your personal life? Because if you can't answer those questions, does that mean that nobody is experiencing those issues in every demographic? So as a woman, as a person of color, as an immigrant, can you explain to me times that you faced this discrimination, times that laws have, helped like stop you from being discriminated against? And I was like, and precisely be able to point to the thing that you knew that the discrimination was because of a demographic and not just because someone was being a jerk. Because that's what her point was. She was like, well, you don't know if these people are being jerks to you because they're transphobes unless they explicitly state that they're, harassing you because you're trans. And I was like, that's not the case, because we have to base our assumptions on people's motivations inductively, and we do it all the time. And you base it on their actions, their tone, and it's all the context that goes into any type of situation where there is some possible discrimination going on, discrimination cases that have gone to court still require lots of evidence, and you have to review all the context of everything that was said and all the different exchanges. So I don't think it's fair that on the spot, if you're like, hey, where's the time in your life that you directly face discrimination? You know it was like specifically caused because of some demographic that you have, and how can you prove that it was that demographic and that this person isn't just like being a jerk for some random reason? After I asked her that question, she thought about it for a second. Oh, then she acknowledged my point that she could not prove that the time that she has felt that she has faced discrimination, that she could show that it was directly because of some demographic that she had. But she said, well, I know it when it happens to me. And I mean, that's no better way to put it. It's true though. You know, it's hard to, unless somebody is being explicit about why they are being aggressive to you or whatever, you can pick up on and detect when somebody is being discriminatory toward you, either like tone of voice, body language, all these things, etc., etc. However, even in this case, she was saying that she still felt that LGBT people in particular would be a lot better off if we were a lot more civil in conversations, because she was like, even in the conversation that she was asking us, she was detecting like a little bit of like maybe like a irritated undertone. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're asking us to defend why we ought to have civil rights. And the implication is, if we cannot give you specific examples of how we faced discrimination before and how the Equality Act would help our lives, the implication is that it's not necessarily needed. But she recognized immediately why it would be weird if I were to start asking her questions about her demographics and say, like, should we strip away the rights of people of color, of minorities, of whatever, you know, demographic that you are, if you cannot give examples of how you've been specifically discriminated? Because that's not what the law is for. The law isn't for like one individual not to be discriminated against. The law is to protect as many people as possible. So just because I don't play sports doesn't mean that trans people as a category don't need those rights. There are plenty of trans people that face all sorts of discrimination in sports and around sports. And, you know, from mockery in tabloids to being denied being able to compete in like high school, to every single time, you know, a trans woman wins a competition. I mean, they're crying that this trans woman is winning Jeopardy. Now, that's not even, I mean, like, I guess it's like an election. It's a competition. But anytime a trans woman or a trans person starts to excel at anything, you can just line up the cis crybabies that are going to be, you know, saying that they ought to be canceled, they ought to be removed, they ought to not be allowed to compete. But oh no, the worst thing would be if you were to tell that person, hey, come on, fuck off. You know, that's the real issue. The real issue isn't that somebody could say that they think that God is going to, like, you know, destroy everyone like you in a fire or something, or whole cities have been destroyed because you know, people like have same-sex attractions, that sort of stuff. That's not an issue. Saying that you know, who you are as a person is nothing but a lifestyle, or that we're all mentally ill. None of that is a problem. Hey, you ought to be civil no matter what they say, because if you get a little irritated, if you let a little bit of passion sneak into your voice right there, that's the real problem. You're totally blocking off the debate space from these jerks. You're stopping them from being able to debate just because they cannot freely advocate for a white ethno-state without any kind of pushback. It's the absolute blatant hypocrisy of these types. If you are a right-winger and you talk about civility politics, then that means that, you know, if we have to be civil and you expect us to be civil, then you should not bring up subjects like debating our existence, debating us having civil rights, debating whether we should be allowed to have kids, debating whether like your God is going to destroy us or something. Don't bring that to the table and then expect that we're all going to just sit there, smile at you and just be like, oh, sweetie, it's so nice of you. Oh, you said that you wish that, you know, all the kids that were like me growing up were all exterminated and then your God could throw us in a lake of fire. That's totally fine. No, fuck you and fuck your civility. Please hit that like button Also subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. And I'm going to go take a walk or something. I'm going to calm down from this civility bullshit. All right. I will see you in the next video.
Tell me pretty lies, look me in the face, tell me that you love me, even if it's fake.